Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. Once again, this is a match from the Twitch stream. So this was on Schwarzhofen, and I was playing out as the Greenskins against the Force of Chaos, so doing a little bit of a silly build. Just having fun and seeing what I could make, what I can make work. So for my Lord, bringing Azag the Slaughter, not much to say there. He's solid. He's always been one of the more competitive Lords. He's got Fate of Buna, Spirit Leech, he's got Life Leeching, so good selection, good little magic there, decent magic. Foe Seeker and Wa, so he can buff the troops beneath him. One of the cool things is that you don't have to personally engage him or get that play a risky game. Say your opponent brings Kolek. You might not want to land on top of Kolek. You can just stay above your troops and buff them from a position of relative safety. My front line is composed of 3 units of Black Orcs backed by the Apex Loonies. The Apex Loonies are, of course, the Regiment of Renown Night Goblins. They're unbreakable, which makes them decent. They've got poison, and that'll help support the 2 Black Orcs near them. And they do have loons of the Apex, which are basically just, as far as I'm aware, they might not even be different. They look different. They spin chained up dwarves instead of balls and chains, but I'm not even sure if their actual effect is different to the normal ball and chains the Fanatics send out. For support, I do have a Night Goblin Shaman with the usual sort of debuffs. He's got the Wand of Jet, of course, for extra power reserves. He's got Itchy Nuisance. He's got Sneaky Stabbing and Sneaky Stealing. I think Sneaky Stealing is decent because you'll often be casting these spells fairly often. Chaos, of course, can be a fairly magic-dependent faction. Backing my front line, I do have a pretty solid shooting contingent, 2 units of Savage Orc Arrow Boys, as well as the Rusty Airs. So, obviously looking to debuff my opponent and make use of the really high missile damage on the Savage Orc Arrow Boys. They have 6 armor piercing, as well as 14 normal missiles, so that can actually add up quite a bit. It's the highest non-AP missile or arrow unit in the game, as far as I'm aware. Obviously, High Elf arrows and Wood Elf arrows and all those do significantly less than the crude wooden garbage bows that the orcs use, but whatever the logic might be behind it, either way the orcs do pretty well. And my hope is that here on the flanks they have better range, they can counter enemy skirmishing better, and they can also protect the flanks, defend these Rusty Airs, because if my opponent comes in around with hounds, these guys should be able to beat the snot out of them in melee. Their only big disadvantage is their melee defense is terrible, so they'll take quite a bit of a beating in return. Out on the flanks, we do have the Death Creepers as well as Mogreb's Mangy Marauders, as also providing a mix of poison and AP support, so to chip away at enemy armored troops and chip away at, say, Kolek, slow them down, make them not as good. A single unit of Super Veteraned Up Nasty Skulkers is here in the back. You might be wondering why it's Super Veteraned Up, but you can see that leadership, 63. Definitely not bad, given that their base value is pretty terrible. It's 40. So being able to buff them up, the melee attack will be very good as well, because with Opportunist Murder and Smoke Bomb, they can lock unit in place and then just annihilate it. Even say if my opponent brought Chaos Knights, these guys could snare him and beat him pretty good. Finally, Goblin Big Boss on a Spider, backing a unit of Broken Tusk Mobs, so a bit of an anti-large answer and a bit of more supporting tools and protection for the flanks. For my opponent, interesting choice here with Sartorial the Everwatcher. He's something you don't really see very often. He does have the Plague of Rust, which can be brutal for Black Orcs. Black Orcs' entire survivability revolves around their heavy armor and their high HP pools. And Plague of Rust, especially when overcast, it lasts for, I do believe, what's the duration? The duration is 44 seconds, except the effect doubles. So minus 60 armor means Black Orcs are down to 50, and it means their only shield at that point is their HP pool, which is really rough. They can really get squished pretty quick. But at the same time, with the amount of AP my opponent has on the field, I'm not entirely sure that was the way to go. I think that might be a fairly useless spell here. But regardless, we'll see how it works out. My opponent also did bring Transmutation of Lead. Not a bad idea. Great debuff. It can definitely cripple orcs quite a bit. The weapon damage isn't too significant against AP units, but definitely the melee attack can be huge and annoying. Of course, Sartorial is unbreakable. He causes fear and terror. He's got resistance to magic as well as missile resistance, so no shooting this guy down. Standard die. I definitely think my opponent should have probably brought an extra spell in here somewhere, because Plague of Rust doesn't really sync well or mesh well with this sort of composition, and Transmutation of Lead is solid, but it's usually nice to have an extra sort of cheap spell. Out on the flanks, my opponent does have 2 Chaos Warhounds with poison, so that sort of interfering build. 2 Marauder Horsemasters, so these guys do have very high missile damage. Perhaps this is what my opponent was hoping to do with Plague of Rust, debuff the orcs and then snipe them down with missiles. These actually have decent AP as well as very solid normal missile damage, but their ammo isn't that great, and their range isn't too good either, so I should be able to kind of engage them at long range and hopefully outtrade them. That said, they're pretty quick and their melee stats are okay, so they'll probably trade even reasonably well with the Savage Orc Arrow Boys, much less the Skirmish Gobos or maybe even okay against Nasty Skulkers. My opponent's main line is composed of Chaos Warriors with great weapons, actually only 2 units of them, 2 Chaos Warrior halberds, 2 or 3 Chaos Marauders with great weapons, aspiring champions, and then 2 Chaos Armored Trolls. You can see a fated unit already going down on the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. Personally, I think the Trolls are a little bit of an iffy pick here. My opponent has already brought boatloads of AP, so the Trolls are a bit overkill in my opinion. But nonetheless, we will see how they do. Can see almost immediately. I'm going to focus my fire on this lead unit of Armored Trolls, and obviously the Greenskins are not, or the Greenskin archers are not accurate. They've got the inaccurate trait, but with the Rusty Airs pouring in, debuffing them, the Rusty Airs are accurate, and then the 2 Savage Orcs inaccurate fire. They should be able to wail on them pretty quick. And you can see I do actually dive in with the Night Gobbo Shaman. You might wonder why, but he does apply poison. Oftentimes I try to use him in there. If you can shield him from your opponent sniping him, the Night Gobbo Shaman can actually be kind of useful in there. You can hit your opponents with a debuff if he gets into melee, if he gets some hits in. And you can see these guys are routing pretty quick. My opponent did get a spell off somewhere, but it's really not working out. You can see the Chaos Marauders crumpling. Now, one of the problems is the Chaos Marauders trade incredibly well with Black Orcs. You can see over here the Black Orcs have lost about 3,000 HP, barely less than what the Chaos Marauders lost, and obviously the Black Orcs are over 2 times more expensive. So definitely some rough stuff here. The Black Orcs are getting smushed because of that terrible melee defense. And they're being hit by transmutation of lead now, so that makes things even worse. My opponent hasn't even set in his main wave in all cases. So definitely some rough stuff going on. My opponent's Chaos Warriors with halberds are back there. You can see Azag used Wah, but unfortunately I moved him away, which was a huge mistake on my part. Over here on the flanks, you can see the nasty Skulkers do dive in with the Broken Tusk Mop to engage that flank. But unfortunately, over on this flank, the Warhounds with Poison have swung around. I didn't have enough backline defense, so my opponent is being a bit of a nuisance. Now, he does snare these Death Creepers. I turn around to engage in melee, pincer my opponent between the Savage Orc Arrow Boys, who are charging into melee. Now, the Savage Orc Arrow Boys have some monstrous melee stats. You can see here being debuffed by the Poison. They still have a weapon strength of 31, and their melee attack is still 33, so against the pitiful melee defense of the Warhounds, they will be able to lay a smackdown on them and tear them to shreds. In the meantime, over here, Azag is camping up in the sky, not being very useful, but my opponents made a major mistake here by blobbing all these troops up on these Black Orcs and the Unbreakable Gobbos. 2 halberds, Chaos Warriors with great weapons, aspiring champions, Chaos Marauders. This is a way too much stuff blocked up in one area, especially given he has some advantage in mobility with the Chaos Marauders and aspiring champions. They could definitely circle around somewhere. You can see over here Black Orcs being debuffed, getting slaughtered in the pits. But the archers are able to kind of pivot, and they should be able to start supporting against this backline. Well, over here, thanks to the nasty Skulker Smoke Bomb and the supporting Broken Tusk Mob, my opponent's force here is going to get slaughtered. Obviously, these guys are the nasty Skulkers with those buffs, 45 melee attack and 31 weapon strength, so some absolute powerhouse troops. Over here, I get a slight terror out, pop Foe Seeker, immediately pull through, and the goal is to defend the archers, so get into the back line here. I'm figuring that, Morgos Mangy Marauders, it sucks to lose them, but Death Creepers are not the biggest sacrifice, and the Arrow Boys won't lose too many models. That was kind of my logic here. Or rationale. Over here in the meantime, you can see the Arrow Boys are pounding away at the Marauder Horsemasters. My opponent choosing not to engage in melee, instead picking away at the Black Orcs. So I think a little bit of a mistake here on my opponent's part, but he is collapsing the front line pretty quick. And with only these Black Orcs left and their pretty bad melee defense, they're not going to last too long, especially with those Marauders with or those Warriors with great axes there. You can see that poison from the Shaman does go down, and these guys debuffing them, slowing them down. Sarthorael trying to be a nuisance, but he's going to have a rough time. You can see the archers constantly pounding away at the Marauder Horsemasters. Azag does dive in, and with the Boar Boys in there, Sarthorael needs to get the heck out. He's only got 40 melee defense. He doesn't have great armor. He's in for a rough time. Over in the pits, Black Orcs still holding their own. They get hit by Plague of Rust. I counteract with Itchy Nuisance. And Plague of Rust, like we discussed, isn't going to have a huge effect on Black Orcs here because there's so much AP. Nasty Skulkers, though, going in with a rear charge. The flanks have been secured. You can see the trolls here slaughtered, and they actually shattered despite still having a good amount of models. And in the meantime, all this shooting is definitely being a nuisance. My opponent gets a little cheeky here with Sarthorael, turns around to pursue because he's got these halberds in tow. I turn around and turn and jump on Sarthorael. So it's been a bit of back and forth here between two kind of mid-tier melee heroes or melee lords. Neither Sarthorael nor Azag are terrible. They're also neither of them is great either. But either way, we are trying to pepper down. I've shifted the fire of my archers onto these halberds, trying to chip away at them and force them to break. Actually, it looks like I haven't done that. I'm focusing on the Horsemasters, trying to rout those off. But shortly, I will shift to the Chaos Marauders, or Chaos Warriors. You can see a huge mistake here with the Broken Tusk Mob. They're down to just a few models. Their melee defense is atrocious, and they're going to break against this focused fire from the javelins, from the Warriors' halberds, and all that sort of stuff. Now over here, the Night Gobbo Shaman does dive in to help against Sarthorael, and it helps bog him down. Sarthorael is being slowed down, actually, and with the Savage Orcs diving into melee, Sarthorael is in for a bad time here, especially with Azag constantly pounding on him. So definitely some rough stuff. And in the meantime, the Gabo Big Boss here, tying down the Chaos Warriors as the archers continue wailing on him. And once these Chaos Warriors break, my opponent's backline is going to be badly compromised. Over here, the courageous Black Orcs, backed by those AP Gloonies, have held the line. And then with the nasty Skulkers jumping in, raking in 127 kills up at this point. And the Black Orcs still holding the line, getting hit by Plague of Rust. Like I said before, I think that was a major mistake on my opponent's part, or major mistake as far as choices go on my opponent's part. You can see the archers finally wipe out these halberds, are able to focus fire on the Marauder Horsemasters, the Gabo Big Boss pursuing them. So the Horsemasters are starting to rout. Azag is still around and kicking. He's going to dive into these Chaos Warriors, who are, of course, susceptible to fear and terror. So they're going to terror out here, and Azag's going to be able to shatter them. So my opponent's army at this point is going to start breaking the army losses. I do hit Sarthoil with a Spirit Leech, but my opponent does decide to GG out. So as far as the game goes, definitely I think some mistakes were made on both sides. I made a massive mistake towards the late game, throwing my Broken Tusk Mob into the fray against the Chaos Warriors with Halberds. That was an egregious mistake, and it cost me a rather elite and expensive unit for very little gain. They did a good job early on against the Trolls, but later on they just flunked. And it was all my fault throwing them into those Chaos Warriors with Halberds. I could have easily waited and let Sarthoil kind of fall back, and I wanted to chase after him and paid for it. As far as the front line and the rest of the troops go, I think Azag, obviously, not a bad choice, nothing to say there. I think the heroes did what they needed to do, dropping Ichi Nuisance, Fate of Buna, Spirit Leeches, Sneaky Stabbins, all that. Goblin Big Boss providing that necessary support, helping tie down those Chaos Warriors with halberds and allowing the archers to shoot them down. Nasty Skulkers paying for themselves many times over. Now, granted, they're super veteraned up here, and I forget what the exact investment was. Probably close to 700 to 800 gold on these guys. But they did a great job. 137 kills, backing the broken. Sorry, guys. Backing the Broken Tusk Mob, backing the Big Boss early on. They managed to slaughter a unit of Chaos Marauders. They slaughtered those Trolls. Of course, with that Opportunist Murderer trait, they are amazing at just dishing out hurt. And that's Nasty Skulkers are one of those units that's underestimated. Their raw stats don't look too amazing, but Opportunist Murderer, if you can get them in fights where they're winning, plus 13 melee attack and 40% AP damage on a unit that's mostly AP damage to begin with, means they are monstrous. And it really shows here with the stats. They raked in more kills than any other unit on the field. The AP Cloonies held their ground. There's nothing else to say. 47 kills, not bad, honestly, given that they were fighting a mix of Chaos Warriors and Chaos Marauders. Probably most of those were against Chaos Marauders, but still decent. Black Orcs did an okay job holding. Not the greatest trades, definitely. I got some bad matchups with the Chaos Marauders, who of course outtrade them, or trade much better with Black Orcs than Black Orcs traded with them, because Black Orcs' terrible melee defense and the irrelevancy of their armor against Chaos Marauders. But nonetheless, the Black Orcs did manage to rake in some kills, and they managed to hold the line for a pretty long time against a mob of troops, against, I think, like basically one of each of these guys, and was in against a single unit of Black Orcs and the AP Loonies, and they held their ground. The Savage Orc Air Boys did a great job. They shut down the hounds that were pursuing my skirmish cav. They they helped shut down Sarthoil in melee, chase him off, and applying that constant pressure, breaking those Trolls, of course with the help of the Rusty Arrows, breaking up those Trolls, breaking up the shooting, breaking up my opponent's Chaos Warriors, Halberds, and just doing an all-around stellar job. Broken Tusk Mob, okay, but then microed, and of course the skirmish cav did an okay job for what it's worth, but the Mogreb's Mangy Marauders I did kind of throw away. I should have just thrown the Death Creepers into melee against the Hound, let the Mogreb's Marauders escape, but that was a mistake on my part. Look, it happens. For my opponent's build, I don't think it's a bad build, but I think my opponent made some mistakes with his deployment. One, as I mentioned before, I think Plague of Rust was a total waste. If you're going with what's an army that's 90% AP against a faction that is not known for its high amounts of armor, I think it's completely unnecessary. Had I brought a Spider, it still wouldn't have made a difference, because 90% of my opponent's army is AP. So I think that Plague of Rust was a big mistake, and especially casting it so often was a big mistake. I think my opponent would have been much better off bringing, say, Searing Doom for a cheap recasts of the trait on Lore of Metal, and then simply use Transmutation of Lead for those big debuffs that crippled my Black Orcs and make them much less effective at cutting down his own troops. I also think my opponent made mistakes in not using his Marauder Horsemasters to stop my backline shooting. At one point, he had the Rusty Airs in the open and easily accessible, and had he ridden them down, I would have had to throw the Savage Orcs in, interrupting the shooting on 2 units, because obviously the Rusty Airs can't fight off Horsemasters, and that would have been very difficult. Similarly, I think my opponent overcommitted his Chaos Trolls way too soon, and the Chaos Trolls got completely stomped on one flank by the Skulkers and the boar boys, and on the other flank by the archer fire. So those, I think, were the main mistakes my opponent made, and then of course clumping. But so I think a few key mistakes undermined what was actually a pretty solid build, and I think a pretty solid strategy. Definitely the way my opponent deployed and the units he brought were not bad units. I think it's a completely viable strat. I just think the way he executed it was a little bit of a mistake. So nonetheless, good game to my opponent. Deeply real here, I guess. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining, and I hope you found it hopefully a little informative. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below to keep up with additional content. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Over and out.